Marcus and Greg. It is Monday, and glad to see you guys.
It's good to see you, Paul.
Good to see you, P-Town.
Well, so much to take away from last weekend. Why don't we just move ahead?
Iron Bowl.
Iron Bowl.
Look, this is Alabama's a better football team. Not breaking any news there, but we will see how much of a rivalry makes up a difference in a game. People talk about it. Very rarely do you get blowouts in these type of games, but based on what we've seen Alabama do and based on what we've seen Auburn do, Alabama should take care of Auburn pretty handedly in this game.
True, but nobody knows it better than you do. You played for the top team in the country, or number 2, whatever it was, in 2009. It was supposed to be a blowout, and it took a great catch by one of your backfield mates.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge.
Pass, but it was a great
Roy
catch.
Upchurch, yeah. It was a good throw, too. I was on the money, I suppose. From 8 yards away, I'd hope it was.
Well, Cam Newton, this one from shorter yesterday.
That's true. That's true. In regards to the Iron Bowl this year, a couple things that I'm interested in. One, is Damian Harris going to be able to go? That's a pretty significant question. Whether it makes a difference in the game is probably not a huge difference because Josh Jacobs has run as well as he is, and obviously you still just have a ton of backfield depth, something to consider. And I would also like to see, too, a little bit more on Auburn's perspective. Like, what are they going to do to try to show up and make life difficult on Alabama? Because right now their offense can't do much. Their offense is somewhat inept against top-tier competition. Same story, different day. And, yeah, okay, they looked good against Liberty on Saturday, but that's a far cry from the competition that we're going to see them play against on Saturday. So can they generate any offense whatsoever? Because the last 2 times Alabama's played against a stagnant offense, they've been a combined 0 points scored. And I have real concerns as to whether or not Auburn's more versatile or dangerous than Mississippi State and LSU. So can they generate any offense to at least scare Alabama? But right now, no, I have a hard time thinking this game's going to be competitive.
In those 2 teams you mentioned, both of those defenses are better and have performed better than Auburn.
Auburn's defense is good, though.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, but I'm talking about as a whole for the year. Mississippi State and LSU's defense has outperformed Auburn's defense, which we expected Auburn's defense coming into the season to be top tier.
Yeah.
If not 1 or 2.
Well,
so
might have helped them have an offense that could keep them off the field.
Yeah,
that would be helpful.
That would be helpful.
For sure.
It sure would.
Well, what's been interesting about Auburn, though, is when we watch that offensive line, that was a position group that was such a strength last year, and they held up well against Alabama last year. They ran the ball for the most part pretty effectively. Jarrett Stidham had a relatively clean jersey at the end of the game. This year's offensive line for Auburn has been a shell of itself. So is Stidham going to have any time to locate wide receivers down the field? Are they going to be able to effectively run the football? I would say no to both of those fronts because Alabama is going to exact some revenge, I would imagine, on Saturday, given the way last year's game went.
Let's just call it what it is, Paul, and you hear me talk about this all the time from a football context. Auburn wants to run the football. That's how they're successful as an offense and even as a football team. You just mentioned keeping this defense on the field, off the field. Well, Auburn used to do that with the ability to run the football and controlling games. They haven't shown the propensity to do that at all this year, especially against this type of defense. So you got 2 problems in part. One is your offensive line took a giant step back, and they're not even close to being ready for Quinnen Williams and Davis and all of those guys up front. And then 2, you don't have the playmakers that got you out of a bind last year, i.e. Kerryon Johnson and the way Ryan Davis was playing. But the ability for Auburn to do what they did because of Kerryon Johnson in this offense was a difference maker. We saw the direct difference when they played in the SEC championship and Kerryon wasn't healthy. Right. It was a different offense. And even though they started fast, they couldn't sustain that. So, look, it's great to talk about a rivalry, and we can make this game more than what it is. Alabama is so much better than Auburn's football team.
It's like
in areas. So
what's funny is like the Iron Bowl. Don't get me wrong. It's aside from Alabama LSU, it's my favorite game of the year. Iron Bowl is. I live in Birmingham. I respect both programs. I of course love Alabama naturally. It's the 5th most intriguing game in the SEC this weekend. It really is. Like if we're really going to go down the list, the most intriguing game to me might be between LSU and Texas A&M. LSU wins. LSU wins. They go to a New Year's Six bowl game. They lose. They might not.
No, I agree. I have you back on the show. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Paul. How are you today?
We're doing okay.
Good. I wanted to say a word, if I could, about Tammy
Absolutely.
Willard, who I met, as you know, at a remote that you did here in Tuscaloosa at one time. And, we just met one time and spoke probably a total of 10 words. But with the Alabama-Auburn game coming up, there's so much talk about greatest rivalry and most passionate rivalry and so forth. But Tammy was such a good representative, an entertaining representative, sometimes a loud representative, but such a great representative of what makes Alabama-Auburn different. Because there are thousands and thousands of people in this state, Alabama fans and Auburn fans. They don't get tickets to go to the game every year. They don't get to they work all day. They're not online following every single block, but they love their teams. And the one thing in the brief meeting that I had with Tammy, the brief conversation that we had, she loved Auburn. And this week, more than anything, you have to live here to understand what a part of the fabric of people's lives it is for 365 days a year. It matters. And for all the way that people viewed her on her show, she was serious. She didn't want anybody talking bad about Auburn. There are people who are the same way about Alabama, and this game means more to them than people can ever imagine. And she was a great representative of that.
Cecil, I think you said it so eloquently, as you always do. But I don't want to take anything away from today's world, because we live in a pretty amazing time, especially when it comes to Alabama and Auburn, when you consider the success of both programs. But I remember when I first got to Alabama, and you were there as well. This week was tantamount to Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was a different feeling. The game was still in Birmingham. Everyone treated it as if it was the end of we didn't have an SEC title game.
Right.
And every minute of the week had a different type of meaning. And I don't live there anymore, but I feel I'm back a lot, and I'll be back plenty this week. It just seems a little bit different. Well, what do you think has happened?
It does. Well, the world has changed, as you say, first of all. The state has changed. The game's not played with the 50-50 split that it once had in Birmingham. But I also think a little bit of it is that, there is a playoff now, and people do, Auburn in 2010 or 2013, Alabama in most of the years since then, there are games that are beyond this. There used to not be games beyond this. Like you wanted to go to a good bowl, and sometimes you wanted to play like Alabama in 1992 for the championship. But this was the culmination of the year. Now it's just sort of part of the flow for a lot of people, and they say, "Oh, Alabama could get upset," or it could affect. How could it affect the playoff? There used to be none of that. It didn't matter how it affected anything else. It was, in and of itself, the biggest game of the year, and times have changed. Now you can lose the game like Alabama did last year and go on and win the national championship. Whoever dreamed of something like that happening when you and I first started, when Coach Bryant was coaching? There was nothing after this game. Certainly there were bowl games. There were important bowl games. But year in and year out, there was nothing bigger than Alabama-Auburn.
No,
there's still some of that, but
yeah.
it's not what it once was.
But even on this program, Cecil, as you remember, my longtime colleague Pat Smith would put together that Iron Bowl montage that was. I mean, you lived for that day when you finally got to hear it, and it went back to every Alabama-Auburn game, the Bama punt game, and
Sure.
of course we never. I was never there for the kick for the kick six game, but
of our generation, people knew where they were.
Yeah, exactly.
When Van Tiffin kicked the field goal, or when Bo went over the
absolutely.
top, and you didn't have to explain what that meant or what that play was. it was part of being a citizen of the state of Alabama. It really was in that time.
Now, I remember when I got the job in Birmingham many years ago, my uncle said, "Man, you're going to get to cover the Iron Bowl." I mean, that was like the biggest thing in the world. And I remember you do too, Cecil. That the day of that game, one of our my old boss, Bill Lumpkin, had a party, and I mean, everybody. It was unlike any day that I can ever remember as a young
week.
reporter.
You know, it started on Monday. You know, it started as soon as the previous game was over. You know, people talked about nothing else, lived for nothing else. You know, and your show was part of that, Paul, in Birmingham. But it was just talked about all week, and then that in turn became all year.
Yeah.
And so there is still an element, but now it's on campuses. Now Alabama's got a game the next week. Last year, Auburn had a game the next week, you know, and that just, it's different. And I'm not a get off your lawn guy or everything was better 40 years ago guy, but it's just different. But again, whether you're talking about Tammy or whether you're talking about Phyllis, they were of a similar generation. That's what they were raised on. That's what they knew, and there was nothing that happened on the football field, certainly your families and so forth, but nothing that could happen in entertainment or sports came close to the Alabama-Auburn game.
No, and I think, too, not to wax too poetic, but the idea that it didn't always, because there was a time when it was the week before Thanksgiving, but for most of the series' history, it was the Saturday after Thanksgiving in 1992. It was on Thanksgiving Day. A couple of times it was the day after Thanksgiving, but that was when Alabama and Auburn didn't have as much clout as they do now. They're not moving this game off that Saturday.
No, their network of choice would not be pleased with that. So again, it's just something to think about this week, and I thought it was, you know, certainly sad to hear about Tammy, but particularly poignant to think about her and so many of your callers and so many fans around the state who have lived that game their whole life and what this week meant to them.
Well, and I know this is about the game and everything else, but Cecil, I dare say that in the history of this program, you very possibly would qualify as the most frequent guest, and so I think you played a very big role, and well, I know that's not why you're here, but it's also part of. I mean, there was a time when you were on pretty much every day, because it was because there was so much going on at Alabama, and very little of it was good.
Sure. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, and you know the pendulum's going to swing again someday. That's the one lesson I know from having been around to cover Coach Bryant, and then the long up and down in between, and you know what's gone on here the last 10 years with Nick Saban is unprecedented college football history, but it doesn't last forever, and that's part of the great fabric of college football, and why people who love college football love it above any other sport. You know, it's technically the same game as the NFL, but it's not the same passion.
On that, and certainly Saturday, we had somebody say, "Well, Alabama certainly didn't have a very good day." What really happened? What really happened Saturday in that game, as best you can describe?
I don't think their focus was great. I thought credit to the Citadel, who did a good job with their game plan. Had a 7.5-minute possession to start the game, and even though they didn't score, Alabama comes back and scores. Citadel has another long possession, and Alabama turns it over and misses an assignment, and the next thing you know, it's 10-10. I didn't know anybody at halftime that realistically thought it was going to end up tied, you know, or that Alabama wasn't going to pull away. You could see on the field that there's a large, as Nick Saban said, there wasn't a player on the Citadel team that could start at Alabama. And that eventually is going to bear out. But so I think their focus was not probably as good as it should be. It is difficult to prepare for the speed of the triple option, and not the athletic speed, but the ability to execute that teams who are committed to it, like the service academies, like Georgia Tech, like the Citadel, do. Alabama made the adjustments at halftime. They couldn't stop. They really couldn't stop Tua and Alabama's receivers from making big plays because they're just NFL caliber athletes going against FCS teams. So it's one of those games. Alabama scored 40 points in the second half. If they had scored 40 points in the first half, nobody would have talked about it. But it's in some ways probably didn't bother Nick Saban, who can go back and preach about assignment football, being prepared, being psychologically ready, playing every week, and so on. So it was interesting for a half. Made for great social media for a half, but it ended up probably more or less where people thought it would end up.
Yeah, just your typical 37-point differential.
50 points, which that is different. Alabama didn't used to score 50 points very often.
I take it back, 33 points. My math is incorrect, Cecil.
That's okay.
I was trying
if
to.
Alabama could make it, if Alabama could make an extra point, you'd be right, Paul.
Yeah, no, I always forget the PAT department at Alabama.
It's optional.
What can you tell us about the health of the two quarterbacks?
Jalen played, and I wouldn't say either one of them are 100%, but I think that there aren't very many football players in late November who are 100%. You've got nicks, you've got bruises. Tua looked much more comfortable without the knee brace. Didn't have any of the long stretches of lying on the turf after he got hit. He bounced right up. So I think they're both available, and they'll both be fine. And obviously Tua will start and play and may play 4 quarters. We'll see how the game goes. Auburn's got a good defensive front. They'll pressure him. They'll try and speed him up. They'll hit him if they can, and so we'll see how that works. But it'll be fascinating to see Tua go against that defense.
Cecil, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much, especially the kind words about Tammy and the importance that she has had here. We will see you soon.
Thank you, Paul. See you this week.
Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We are going to take a break. More to come. Greg and Marcus a little bit later on. Ralph Russo. Reminder, we will be in Tuscaloosa for the Friday show, and we're coming right back.